Thanks very much, Adrian, for that. So after those two great presentations, we now have the opportunity to have a panel discussion. As you will have heard from Adrian, we've got a great panel up here. So we have some questions, but obviously we'd love to have some questions from the floor. So at any point, feel free to interject and put your hand up, and we'll get some conversation going. So to start things off, we just wanted to talk a little bit and tap into some of the experience we have around the table, so to speak here, about some specific energy challenges that some of our panelists are currently facing with their operations in Africa, either from a perspective standpoint or from an operations standpoint. So maybe what we'll do is start, if we could, with Francois, and then Ron, you can jump in, and then Ryan.
Hi, my name is Francois Claire. I'm the CEO of All Gold Resource. We're actually developing a gold mining project in Mauritania, and we also have some exploration license in Mauritania and Burkina Faso. Been working in Africa for over 25 years. And of course, the challenge of working in very remote environment. In Mauritania, there's no grid except for the major town. And we are about 350 kilometers from the nearest town. So, of course, there's no grid, and energy is a major concern to us.
Good morning. Our project's in Burkina Faso. We've got the benefit of being right on the highway, about an hour east of town, and we're only 10 kilometers from a 30 megawatt grid, but there's not enough supply. And I think that bodes well for us long term. There's a new grid to come in, and our objective is really to work on the softer material first, start up with low power consumption, and then as we can, build into renewable energy. But the major concern is access, reliability, and in Burkina, there's also taxes on top, surtaxes, et cetera. So all of that drives us towards renewable in a very big way.
Great. Ryan?
Ryan Hairsign from Rocks Gold. Our mining project's also in Burkina Faso, so we struggle with reliability and availability of power as well, and that goes hand in hand, and typically with West African nations with political risk. We are fortunate enough to be about 4 kilometers from the national electric grid. However, that power is generated from Côte d'Ivoire, so it's not only the political risk within the country you're operating, but it's also from where the power is generated.
And maybe we could get Erwin, if we could, to, as we saw obviously from the previous presentation, solar's going to play a role in addressing the power challenges. It'd be interesting to understand from your perspective, the role of solar, and what are some other current case studies of African mining operators in integrating renewables into your business.
Right, yeah, so my name is Erwin Spolders. I'm the CEO of Redavia. We're the largest rental solar farm company in Africa right now. In terms of case studies, I think we've seen many case studies over the last few days. I think the IM Gold project is very interesting. I think the Grussa project shows also that even at medium penetration, you can do something, even if it still requires some level of subsidization. In terms of Redavia, we've just done a project at Shanta Gold that's been running for about 3 years. Just expanded that project 7 times, so expanded the solar capacity times 7, and extended the original contract by another 5 years. So that shows also that Shanta Gold was very happy with our service. So I think what I've seen, I think the issues have been teased out. Like, people understand now the technical issues, the life of mine issues, the financing issues. It's a question now of bringing it together and do projects, right? I think we are getting to the point where it's replication of models that have worked.
And that's a good segue maybe to come back to each of Francois and Ron, to your opening comments, and as Erwin's saying, we've sort of seen a bit of the model and now it's time to implement it. How do each of you see that you're addressing your power challenges and the role that renewables play for your operations? Maybe we could start, if we could, with Ron, and then go back to Francois.
Well, as I said, we've got the benefit of the soft material first, so capital constraint is probably our biggest issue for all of us when you're one company building your first mine. You know, I think we get open arm treatment from Caterpillar for equipment. You know, the very low leases, et cetera. When I wasn't here yesterday, unfortunately, but I couldn't help thinking here today, everybody should partner up with CAT, who is, you know, generous about building operations, lower loans. The power goes with them, and I would certainly like to see them come back with a proposal to us saying, here's the additional amount, it's reasonable, let's start with a bit of solar. We would then build the rest into our sustaining capital. And we're on our way from 5 megawatts to ultimately 25, so I think we have to address this on a 5 to 10 year plan and build a little bit in every year.
Yes, in Mauritania, we don't have the opportunity of having soft material. We're directly in hard rock. And in our startup technical study we're doing, we're looking at a 10-year mine life at the moment and looking for a 10-year contract with a company that would propose both solar energy and, of course, genset. It would be very difficult in the situation where we are, where in the desert, availability of sun power is incredible. We can have almost 100% efficiency there, receiving, of course, the solar light. However, as it's been shown, there's a decrease during the night, so you have to, and it's very difficult to stock enough energy to develop a mining process. So we need alternative renewable energy. We are thinking of a 10 megawatt solar plant and a 10 megawatt diesel plant at the moment. And the solar could reduce our cost of energy by about 35% over mine life, which for us is very important. And another very important point is that the government of Mauritania has signed COP21 in Paris and is developing itself in all their major city and in smaller town, a large renewable energy, either solar power or biomass energy to sustain the development of those towns. Because as in Burkina Faso or elsewhere in Africa, energy is the next big challenge. A couple of years ago was telecom. Now you go anywhere in the desert and everyone has a cell phone because there's tower everywhere. However, there's still no tower for the electricity. So we know that it is the major challenge of the next decade or even maybe longer than that in Africa. So we have to think differently, and differently means bringing in all the available tools and technology so that we can rely on something else than diesel energy.
And maybe just before we go on, maybe we could just pick up on one thing you said there about, and I'm just interested about the role of storage that you see.
Yeah, we're looking also at the potentiality of, well, there's a big thing with Elon Musk building those large battery cell. The problem in the desert is the heat, and how much heat, how much cooling system would you need to bring down the heat of those? Yeah, so we're looking at that at the moment. We're hoping to be able to find some kind of solution at one point in time, but definitely it's the next step. There's a lot of mine now that run with alternative solar power for the day, for the camp and the infrastructure, but not directly for the mill site. We're looking for the next step, which is basically storing the energy for the night potential.
And maybe, Siskani, we could go back to you and just pick up on some of the points you were making in your presentation and talking about when you're running the business case for hybrid power, what are some of the main hurdles that you've encountered that you need to overcome or you need to consider?
So in terms of hybrid systems, I think one of the things that one has to be mindful of is the supply chain, especially the impact of extra trucks coming through small towns and going through to your mine and passing towns that have no energy or access to energy. That can create a lot of unhappiness, and it could, in some instances, result in your trucks not being able to arrive at your mine. In other words, being held hostage. So one has to be mindful of the overall impact, especially of the supply chain of all of these fuels to the mine. obviously when you look at renewables, in a way you minimize some of that disturbance, social disturbance, if you will, because you are able to generate mostly on-site, or if it's via the grid, it's already it's an accepted form of transportation of energy in terms of electricity. So sometimes it's not the technical issues that can derail a project. We increasingly, especially at Goldfields, we increasingly making sure that we understand fully the impact across the value chain, because that's when, and we've seen in South America recently, a number of projects being given the red light, but not because technically they were not good or commercially, but because the communities aren't happy. So one has to be very mindful of such things as the impact to the host communities.
And it's interesting, just your comment there. Maybe I can open it up to the panel to jump in, because one of the comments you said there made me think about community engagement and how you get sort of community engagement and social license to do the operations you want. To be interested in. They don't know that I'm asking this question, so to open it up to panel for anybody who might want to comment on that, because what you just said about running through trucks, et cetera, through small towns and people not having electricity, of course, segues into that. So, maybe Erwin.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, because there's obviously a change going on in energy transition in the mining sector, but at the same time, there's an enormous change going on in rural electrification, particularly in East Africa, with millions of people getting new energy access through solar home systems, through mini-grids. And I think it's a great opportunity to bring together the mines that are in remote communities and the communities themselves through energy access. Right? So Redavia does both. Like, we are a mining services company on the one side, we're also a rural electrification company. We run the 3 largest mini-grids in Tanzania right now, 500 households per grid. Commissioned one yesterday, a new one, and they're in the same region as the Shanta gold mining operation. Not related, there's no cross-funding or anything like that, but it's just, we're already in the region, we're doing that also from a commercial background, and I think the 2 trends are coming together, right? Rural electrification, solar energy makes it possible in both segments, and in some way, that will benefit, I think, both parties. It's not clear exactly how, but I think it's important to realize that there is also another trend going on in rural electrification that will, and if mining can tap into that, that will also benefit both, I think.
Anybody else want to jump in? My rogue questions, go for it.
Yeah, not much for us. We've spent 15 years focused on water first, fixing schools, helping farmers grow food was really the priority, and there is a local grid that we can't use, but there's one for the people. But as we go towards developing a larger mine and a plant, certainly electrification for the neighbors is part of it. I liked your comment about mining companies have to have a soul. I think that drives home here what we're all about here today.
And then maybe, Ryan, we can just pick up on, understand that Roxgold considered solar for your mine in Burkina Faso, and just be interested to understand some of the factors of why you decided not to move forward with that.
Right. So when we looked into the option, well, we are 4 kilometers from the grid. We're an underground high-grade gold mine. We have a relatively short mine life as well, at 8 years. So when we looked at solar in comparison to connecting to the grid, it was at the time relatively clear that the most economic option was to commit the capital, build the infrastructure, and connect to the grid. We also needed, or with that still comes reliability issues, so we had to install a diesel power station as well, basically protecting us against loss of revenue, also health and safety wise, keeping our people safe, keeping the ventilation and pumps running underground. So in saying all that, that was 12, 18 months ago. Things have changed considerably since then. So it is something we are starting to revisit or getting interested about now, is incorporating solar into the energy mix, both to help, I guess, ease reliability concerns, as well as lower our diesel supply costs.
And maybe, Erwin, you could comment on, these lights are great, you could comment on what's been the impact of lower oil prices on the economics that you've seen of doing alternative power?
Right. I think the headline message and the headline value of solar has to be you're saving money versus diesel. Right. I think that's obviously the key point. There's the hedging value that comes to that, and there's the reputational benefits as a third element. I think actually what I hear a lot when speaking to leaders of junior miners is also the culture bit that came back, the culture of efficiency that you instill by having a solar farm on site. So I think those four things are value creators. The head one, the biggest one, the main one has to be cost savings. So clearly lower oil prices affect that. In our case, we haven't, our solar is still cheaper than diesel, even when the oil price was at high 20s dollars per barrel. So I don't think it sort of negates the value. I think it makes it harder to do medium and high penetration projects with storage. I think if the price of oil was still at 100, we'd all be doing lithium-ion battery projects right now rather than fuel-safe, battery-free projects. But in the end, it's a postponement of the break-even point of that system also. Right? The DeGrussa type is a model for the future, and I think it is the next step technologically. As solar comes down, still at really rapid rates, battery storage costs come down at even more rapid rates. So it's just these two curves, a resource curve that gets more and more expensive and a technology curve that gets cheaper and cheaper as time goes on.
I'd maybe just add something. Burkina Faso and maybe some others, it's very sticky fuel price, so it hasn't come down as much. And I think this is really important here, is that the government applies VAT, the government applies a surtax and a handling fee. So all of that adds to your volatility and risk. So this is a real underpin on why we want to look at solar long term, because if you can fix your price of energy long term, you want to lean that way for sure. And the negative to all of that is that you go renewable, there's really not a great tax policy in the country. You can be sure that if they're losing that surtax, they're losing their VAT, they'll quickly come around and say, oh, we're now going to apply a little surtax on your renewable energy. So that's another risk to come as well.
And then, Ron, maybe you can pick up on the comment made earlier by Toscani in his presentation about challenges with debt financing of projects in Africa. I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that and what you'd like to see sort of on a go-forward basis in terms of financing options for hybrid solutions.
Yeah, it goes along with the capital constraint. I mean, we're a 100 million market cap with a 250 million build. It'll bear 150 million in debt. But then you add renewable on there, say another 3 or 4 million, the senior lenders are going to throw that into your hedge book as well. So I think we need to put pressure on, the rest, on development banks, on senior lenders to say, look, we're happy to go this. It reduces your overall risk on the cost of energy, but you got to leave that outside the hedge book, or we need a slightly cheaper loan. And anybody that can step in to back that up, I think, given this, there's a lot of goodwill to go this route for a lot of reasons. I think that's where the bankers have to go as well.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that is happening. Like, I think we play in both the sort of rural electrification segment and in the mining segment, and we get fund. We've raised significant amounts of funding. And you can see that the development banks who before were hesitant around mining are now much more willing and okay with having a portfolio that consists of some communities where clearly they really like that from a developmental impact perspective, some ag businesses where it's sort of medium, and then some mining where before they said, not sure about mining, that fits with our mandate, we're a development bank. Now they're saying actually there's clear environmental benefits. You can show that it's helping the mining sector also take a different position, a more shared value position, as you said, in society. So that then has helped us, and you can see that over the years, a lot of these DFIs, development finance institutions, have come around and are now, for us at least, more ready to fund our mining projects also.
And Francois Toscani, we touched upon this obviously, certainly in the keynote presentation and then in some of your comments already, but perhaps each of you could just comment what you think needs to happen in order for more remote mines in the region to implement renewable energy solutions. If maybe we could start, Francois, with you. That'd be...
Yeah, I think, and I think it's important that the mining industry get to the next level, and the next level is both, good, of course, good social corporate responsibility means a number of things, and it's really nice, as Ron said, to build school and water well and things like that. But the mining industry has definitely a really large carbon imprint, and if we want to show some kind of motivation for the next level, going to, and we're talking solar panel, but renewable energy can be anything. It could be wind turbine, it could be biomass. In Ghana especially, and in Côte d'Ivoire, where there's huge amount of basically cocoa shell from the cocoa industry that are just laying down to stay there and can be reused as biomass to produce more energy. I think the mining industry has to show some involvement in that development of the future. And I stated previously, the next big level of development in Africa will come from the electrification, rural electrification. When you look at those NASA maps taken from the continent at night, North America, Europe, Australia, or China, everything is light. And when you look at Africa, it's black. Basically, you see the big town, you see Dakar, Abidjan, Lagos, then you go down to South Africa, but in the middle, there's nothing. It's black. And we have to believe that bringing electricity, and in this case in Mauritania, really the nearest closest village is about 100 km, so it would be difficult for a small mining project to bring electricity to that little town. However, they've been ahead of us. They already did put solar panel light for along the street, and so in the middle of the desert, there's this small town with about 2,000 people, but they have lights at night, and this is an indication that we can't be behind. We have to be at par or even faster than them, and bringing these new technologies so that everyone can inherit from it.
Yeah, I think, so on that, just comment on that NASA picture. Someone said to me, it just shows how Africans are trying to teach everyone else how to save electricity. But it is a serious issue. It's not as light as I'm making it to be. And I think it's, when you put everything together, you look at or what are some of the drivers, for substituting diesel with some of the renewables, and in particular, I was happy you mentioned biomass, because it's definitely a very key opportunity in the West Africa region. And in fact, in Ghana, there are rumors that government is now saying that they want 10% renewables by the mining companies. And that's part of their commitments to COP21. So we have to be able to connect the dots, and very quickly. And if we do it after the fact, we'll be seen to be responding and reactive, and people, investors and shareholders, expect us to be thinking ahead. And so there's a lot of things happening right now within the mining sector. It's easy for us to sink a shaft. It's easy for us to mine a pit and extract the gold. It's all the other softer issues that in the past we never paid too much attention to. And that's where we're having to tread very carefully in all of this. And we see opportunities for modernizing Africa's energy solutions through all sorts of renewable solutions being one of the key opportunities that we could embrace. Obviously, this doesn't wash away the water challenge, quality of water, because we are also seen to be polluting the water there. So, and all of these are interlinked, and we have to be thinking like that as mining companies. So it's a real challenge, and I'm glad that we're not the only ones who are thinking ahead of this.
Maybe before we open it to the floor for some questions for our panelists, we'll just close off with asking any of the remaining panelists. Just Ron referred to the role of development banks in debt financing. Perhaps each of you can comment on what role you think that both government and development banks can play in supporting alternative power options for the resource sector. Erwin, go for it.
As I'd mentioned before, I think we're welcoming to see, the best cost of capital to deploy these things, and I fully believe that this whole sector is really going to pick up some momentum as several projects get built, and it's established that one, the price is cheap, and two, it's more reliable than even a local grid. Mining companies have basically been our worst enemies at advertising. We're great corporate citizens, but I also see this renewable as a way to now showcase the work we do overall, not just the renewables. And we've been kind of waiting for this catalyst, and I think the development banks, as many have mentioned, everybody's afraid of mining guys, the NGOs, the development banks, et cetera, and now we can show that these projects work, everything shines, and we will get a lower cost of capital because it all makes sense.
Fully agree with that. I think that's, and I think the way to do that is to also link it to COP, right? The COP, the constraints are coming down, but there's also the Green Climate Fund that also comes out of COP that brings the funding down, right? And Deutsche Bank is working on a $2 billion fund out of the Green Climate, seeded by the Green Climate Facility to specifically for renewables. And they have a specific chunk of that funding that is for projects like Redavia, projects like we're discussing here that are specifically B2B, large-scale industrial projects. So, there's a very strong silver lining and even opportunity of COP and climate change regulation for mining, particularly in metals, I'd say.
I just have one more point before I forget the thought. This whole drop in energy just draws in more reserves and resources. And all of these countries, you look at Burkina, 9 mines in 10 years. There was no mining before. Now it's 20% of the GDP of the country. So if you now take the opportunity to increase the reserves more, there's just a huge, incentive to now develop the country and add to the economy by helping the mines, which is now, again, pretty much a first because everybody didn't like the mines before.
So are there any questions from Adrian's got the mic there. Any questions from the floor for?
One quick question, if there's a question. Otherwise, I'm sure the panel will be around during the break. Is there a question?
Oh, there's a question.
Thank you. Could you talk about how stranded assets would be a risk and how you can mitigate that?
On the solar side or the mining side? Is it on the solar side or on the mining side?
On the solar side.
So in our case, we've designed our system to be 100% redeployable for less than 5% of the original CapEx. So we can recontainerize every single component within 4 days per container, and one container is 100 kilowatt peak. We did that earlier this year at a project in Tanzania. So that means on average in our lease portfolio, the average lease is 7 years long, and we basically make our money back just about in that period. But it basically means that for less than 5% of additional CapEx, we can then redeploy that asset at least 4 times through its useful life. And even afterwards, we think that a fully depreciated solar farm will continue to have value and continue to generate electricity almost for free. So it's technically possible with a learning curve to make solar farms fully redeployable and really deal with that, to make them like a liquid asset, like a car or a plane or a copying machine that you can lease as an asset rather than financing on the PPA and the off-taker only.
Can I just one quick one on that comment? Specifically, if you look at underground mines, what you have to appreciate is a mine not being like I always say, not being like a chocolate factory. So when we say we stopped production, we don't lock the gates and go away. We have legally, we have obligations in each of the territories. It's heavily regulated. You cannot just flood the mine overnight. You have to continue to pump water. In some instances, you must treat the water. So there is still, it might not be as high in terms of your load, but there's still a need for electricity beyond your normal production. And that is something very key that I wish bankers could understand what a mining client looks like in terms of the demand profile, not over a day, but over the life cycle of the mine. And it's very key in most of the countries. There are regulations that you have to put away some money, either they put trusts and all that to deal with closure. And most of the times, electricity is still needed. So you have to realize that it's not your full asset that gets stranded. It could be a portion of it, and sometimes it never gets stranded. I think in South Africa, we've had about 2, if not 3 mines that have really closed with all the mines that we've had running. And every time we have to talk closure, people need to understand what closure means in the mining environment. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And with that, could you please join me in thanking the panel for what's been a great conversation.